I'm going to admit everybody.
Shalom, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our second Lunch and Learn out of our series of three. My name is Michal Abramoff, and I am the Shlicha, Israeli emissary working at Central Synagogue. And I'm very excited to be hosting this Lunch and Learn. And I'm even more excited to be welcoming our guest speaker today, Cantor Rabbi Shani Ben Ol, which I'm sure a lot of you have already met and know. And we're very, very excited that she's here with us today. And we will be talking today about Jerusalem and about Jerusalem Day and sort of hearing from Shani about her story and her connection to the city, to the day. So with no further ado, Shani, please take it away.
Great. It is good to be back. I'll tell you, you're going to learn, if you don't know me already, you'll learn a lot about me in the next 20 minutes or so. And then I hope we can have a great conversation as well. So any questions that you have while I speak, just like put them in the chat, whether if you're on Facebook or here with us, and we'll try to gather them and answer and be in conversation. I am here and I want to start with music because I've been in Central Synagogue. Central Synagogue is in my heart, and soon I'll share my connection. But I really love the connection that we have had throughout the years through singing together. So just a little nigun, Yom Yerushalayim, a traditional text that we also recite at the chuppah, the Jewish wedding. Just, stating how Jerusalem is always in our hearts, but also our hopes for a Jerusalem that is a place of wholeness and of peace is also something that we always aspire to. And then we'll dive in. Tishkach yemini tidbak leshoni lechi imlo azkerechi את So now that we're a little more centered, and we'll also see throughout this talk, and I know that throughout your lunch and learns at this time, you've seen also the complexity that this land, the state of Israel and Jerusalem bring with it. But at least we have a few moments where our hearts were lifted in song, and that's also important to me that will come from a place of openness, hope, and love, which is what I have to my country and to Jerusalem. I'm born and raised in Jerusalem. And I see everyone already commenting, and I'm so happy to see you all. So I want to share another Israeli song that is my inspiration for this segment that we're doing, preparing for an event on the Jewish Israeli calendar next week, Yom Yerushalayim. If you have never heard of this day, you're probably in good company. There are many reasons for that, and we'll try to understand it throughout our segment, throughout my personal story. So don't worry about that. But definitely it's something that, I think as liberal egalitarian Jews that have critical thinking, we don't want to have any event on our calendar that we don't understand, even if we don't, 100% relate and identify. That's what I feel. I feel like from a place of knowledge, we need to grow and figure out how we lead our communities and our Jewish lives here in Israel and around the world. So without further ado, I want to show you a very simple 2 words, Yerushalayim Sheli, my Jerusalem. There's a song that I love as a Jerusalemite, that an Israeli song that uses these words, my Jerusalem, to explain a spectrum of experiences and identities that are here local in Jerusalem. Basically, in this song, you hear these words repeat themselves. Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim Sheli. So in every time that a different character in this song says those words, my Jerusalem, then they go on to the verse telling what is their Jerusalem. And they go on and go on. They say, to me, Jerusalem is the fish in the market. And to me, Jerusalem is the person on the street. And to me, Jerusalem is this and this landmark. And basically, what this song tells, and is very true to the city of Jerusalem from my experience, is that there are a lot of people in Jerusalem that feel that Jerusalem is theirs, and a lot of people in the world, and which is an amazing thing. And I also invite you to think already now, what is your Jerusalem? What is your Yerushalayim Sheli? What for you is Jerusalem? What smell? What image? What relationship? What passage? What prayer? Because Jerusalem, a lot of people, and I'm saying, it's a good thing also, feel ownership over Yerushalayim, over Jerusalem. That being said, in this song, in this Israeli song, in every verse, we dive into a different character from a different neighborhood, and they have a totally different Jerusalem, which is already also very, very true to the experience growing up and living in Jerusalem, is that there are parallel experiences, that Jerusalem is a very segregated city, that somebody that was born in one neighborhood has a Yerushalayim Sheli, and somebody that was born in a different neighborhood has a totally different Jerusalem. Both and more are Jerusalem. And I think a lot of what we experience here are where those Jerusalems meet, connect, and also conflict. And you'll see that throughout my talk. It is a Jewish custom to dedicate a shiur, Jewish learning, a lunch and learn like this, an experience and gathering, to a memory of a loved one. So before we hear about what my Jerusalem is, my Yerushalayim Sheli, I wanted to dedicate this lesson to our rabbi friend, Laura. She's not really a rabbi, but I think she's many of our teachers. May she rest in peace. When I was an intern in Central Synagogue, she was a very fundamental part of my growth. Together, we founded the Mishkan Mini, and you can see her there with myself, with Alana Arian, with Rabbi Michal Abramoff, which I also wish her a lot of luck on her journeys, and all these wonderful people, some of whom are here now. And Laura, last time I did a segment and talked about my family, and soon I'll talk about my family. We had a few exchanges of emails, and I discovered that we're very similar in our relationships to our mothers. And I mean, this is just, she really, every time I come to Central, I think of Laura, and it fills me with joy, and it reminds me of what beautiful connections we have and we maintain. So this lesson, this shiur, from me, Rabbi Cantor Shani Ben-Or, is dedicated to Laura. So what is my Jerusalem? This is a picture of myself when I was a little girl, maybe 5 years old. It's a real picture. I'm 30, almost 6 years old. And I know that that's young-ish, but also it's before every picture you took on your phone. Like, this is an actual physical picture that was scanned. And you might not see, but behind me is one of the most iconic views of Jerusalem. Like I said, I was born and raised in Jerusalem. And this picture in many ways resembles what is Jerusalem to me. So what do we have here? Like I said, I'm about 5 years old. I'm standing on in Almona Netziv on the Tayelet, the boulevard, the very famous in Jerusalem, where you could see exactly where my back is to Temple Mount. And my face, I'm facing a different mountain that's very important, Mount Moriah, which is the story of the binding of Isaac. And so if I would turn my face, if you would turn me as a little girl to look at the view, which is how we grow up here in Jerusalem, but also if you've toured and visited, you probably were at this boulevard and this view. So behind me, would be one of the most iconic biblical stories that we recite on high holidays. And in front of me, one of the memories of the time of Jewish autonomy in the land. But none of this interests me in this picture at all. It's not why this is my favorite picture. Because actually, when I was 5, I probably didn't really know any of what I just told you. And when I pass there on a day-to-day basis, my parents now live nearby, it's probably not what I'm thinking about. Just an ordinary, beautiful scene, but just ordinary to me. My father decided to take me out that day to do a special personal day. I'm one of 5 siblings. And my parents, it was very important for them to have individual relationships with us. And my father decided to take me on a photo shoot to treat me like America's Next Top Model. I was thrilled. I got a beautiful dress on. He put in a thermos like a tea and cookies, and we just had personal time. You could see how happy I am, and so I think that's very telling in terms of the landscape of Jerusalem, meeting just day-to-day personal experiences. Sometimes they're harmonious and they intertwine those experiences, and sometimes they conflict. For instance, something that I didn't know as a little girl standing there, and it took me 30 years. Only recently I really could understand, is that in between those 2 mountains, Mount Moriah, and Temple Mount, there's a Palestinian village, which is something that definitely was not in my vocabulary or understanding as a 5-year-old. And honestly, the first time I ever had a friend who was Palestinian or talked to a woman with a hijab, a traditional Muslim woman, was 3 years ago. And I was born and raised in Jerusalem. So we're continuing to understand how my Jerusalem is definitely not somebody else's Jerusalem, but also how you think of Jerusalem and experience Jerusalem when you come and visit, and I'm happy that you do, is not the same experience for people that are just local and it's their city. And maybe as New Yorkers, I know that we have people on Facebook, you can relate to that a little bit, living in the Big Apple and experiencing also that aspect of it. So another way to understand my Jerusalem is that I was born and raised in a Reform synagogue, Keilat Kor Neshama, in Jerusalem. I know that saying this in Central Synagogue, in the Reform Jewish setting in the United States, might feel like this picture is is an obvious picture. But in Jerusalem, the fact that this was my tradition and my parents brought it with them from Baltimore, I was in a minority. This is a picture of me, just continuing my Jewish journey. I was thrown on the bima from a very young age in my synagogue, and taught to lead prayers. And here I'm at rabbinical and cantorial school, reciting from the Torah, just an ordinary morning service, with other students who come from totally different backgrounds. I was one of the only participants in rabbinical school, now I'm already ordained, that grew up in the Reform movement. All these people here that you see, all these great men whom I adore, and they're still my colleagues. And tomorrow, David and I, the guy with the glasses, Rabbi David, will be leading something musical, and we still work together. For instance, David grew up Orthodox, not modern Orthodox, just Orthodox. The other 2 come from one from a Mizrahi, a secular background, and one from a secular kibbutz background. So the Reform story in Israel is a big part of my experience of Jerusalem, a city that the public sphere, that the atmosphere feels very traditional. And being a girl and a woman that wants to claim her space in spirituality, I understood already in high school that this was very strange to my friends in the army, that I was a minority. And so that mentality blending into the iconic views of Jerusalem was also a tension and something, a non-conventional route that I chose to take. And now, from different snapshots of Jerusalem, and also before I move on to this thing, to the next picture, I want to say one thing about this picture. Because this is such a big part of my identity, to me, Jerusalem, until maybe I was a teenager, was only about all I could see. If you would ask me, what is Jerusalem for me? It was my synagogue, or it was, here this picture is an HUC, where, we also have a rabbinical school, but also Michal, Sim, and I will talk a little bit, but our youth group has its headquarters. And when I was in youth group, in our Reform youth group, we would do, seminars, and I would sleep on the floor of the synagogue, so like that to me Jerusalem was this big Reform slumber party. And of course, you can imagine my shock in my teenage years, going to the music academy, a very secular high school, going to the army, and people less understanding me, and yet still coming back to my home base to become what felt to me natural, a clergy person, which thank God Central Synagogue played a big part in me normalizing, making that just feel like a big empowering move. And I still take that with me as a clergy person in Israel, that there are places that, Baruch Hashem, I'm not something strange. So that's a very powerful thing to me. But that's also Jerusalem. It's important to understand. What is this picture, and why did I bring it to explain about different Jerusalems that we have, and why a day like Jerusalem Day, which I'll talk about a little bit towards the end now of this presentation part of our section, could be a day full of conflict. So what do we have here? This is actually it's an experience from a new position that I've had in the last 3 years. I've been working at Hebrew University, and I just recently, about a year ago, was promoted to be the head of multicultural and interfaith programming, the Division of Social Involvement at Hebrew University. So my pulpit is a little unconventional. I'm not sitting in a synagogue. I'm sitting at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And this has changed my life and helped me burst a little bit out of my Jerusalem. Why? Because this woman, all these women here, okay, this is an event that we just did for women empowerment. It was the first event ever. It looks like a very tsunua, humble event. And trust me, I love leading services in Central Synagogue in the beautiful hall, but I think that what you have here is not less glorious. It's the first event ever at Hebrew University in Arabic, targeted towards Arab women, and all the panelists were Arab women leader activists. I sat through the whole program. I didn't understand a word, but I understood a lot, which is really fascinating, to agree to sit in a language that is not your own and to see how much you understand. I challenge you all to do that, even though that's interesting that I say that, because honestly, when you sit in services, maybe with the Hebrew, you could feel what I felt with the Arabic, is that even if you don't understand the literal meaning of the word, you understand the culture, you understand certain words here and there, you understand the dynamic. There's a lot you could understand. And I made a deliberate choice to take on an event that I couldn't lead, I couldn't facilitate, and I couldn't even fully understand. But more important than that is the woman, Rahaf, and a few of them have a hijab, 3 out of the 5, who is sitting with her hands open up. She's actually talking. This is her. Rahaf, she used to work with me at university. She is also a poet and an author. She's not even 25 years old. She's published a book that they teach in East Jerusalem in the public school system. A very, very talented Palestinian activist from East Jerusalem. And she's the first woman I ever spoke to and have an actual relationship with, who's not Jewish, in Israel and who is Palestinian. And this is because we shared an office together. It's not because we went to a delegation or flew to Vermont. I don't know why all the dialogue programs are in Vermont and the States are, it's not because of that or because we went once a week to some kind of an interfaith group. No, we literally shared an office. And by the way, now I have a very nice office because I was promoted, but it was a very small, then I was in a part-time job. I came on to the team in social involvement while I was in rabbinical school. I was looking to be more involved in Israeli society. I felt like I was stuck in my niche and I wasn't going to be ready to really claim my rabbinate if I don't really know what's happening in Israeli society. I wanted to burst my little bubble of my beautiful bubble of Reform Judaism that was always very open, but we were a minority and always as open as we were. At the end of the day, my friends, my community, we all looked the same and came from the same social class, even with our good intentions. And I came to Hebrew University, I took on a group that I facilitated of Palestinian and Jewish students. And it's existed already for 10 years. And through that, I had to share an office, so it was a part-time job with Rahaf. And now I can already stop the share screen. I think you have a picture and you understand what a personality she is and what charisma. And sharing the office with her was just about, sometimes she was out of pens and I lent her them. Sometimes I wanted to shop online and we got excited together about a sale. Sometimes she was dating somebody and we were thinking what we're going to text that person. Sometimes I was upset about something and she would help me. But just ordinary, everyday communication that wasn't about, our identities. And yet that day-to-day communication, which had me earn my first friend. Luckily, she's not my last, but mind you, I'm born and raised in Jerusalem, and this happened at age 34, which is mind-blowing to me. Also, in between, I would all of a sudden hear, as we say in Hebrew, ala derech, not like the main part of our conversation, but as a side comment, I would pick up on nuances that gave me insight to full communities, cultures, and experiences. For instance, Hebrew University. I came into Hebrew University. I never studied in Hebrew University. I have 3 degrees. None of them are from Hebrew University. My most recent is my master's in sacred music from HUC, DFSSM, the cantorial school in New York. But I feel very comfortable at Hebrew University. I have a sister who has an office who's writing her postdoc. A lot of people at Hebrew University, I would see her every day. A lot of my friends went to study there. A lot of people from my community are on staff. I come into Hebrew University, a space that I never studied in, and yet I feel a belonging, and I feel comfortable, and I'm sure it was part of my success that I feel a belonging to a place that's in the public domain, public resources, a very good university, and it's called Hebrew University, and that's no issue for me. Great, I love Ivrit, Yerushalayim Sheli, like it all fits in. And yet my friend Rahaf would share experiences that her mother never could come to Hebrew University, even though she is already doing her master's there, because her family used to own land near Mount Scopus, where our campus is at, and before 48, and it's too painful for her mother to come back to a place that is very comfortable to me. So not only are there members in Rahaf's community or in her life that feel disconnected, not belong, but even feel negative connotations, the same space that I can say, Yerushalayim Sheli, my Jerusalem, and it could be a place of growth. It can be a place where somebody else experiences oppression, loss, and that was a big, and so imagine Rahaf coming to work and studying this place that her mother can't even come, or can come, but it's very complicated for her when she gets her degree, right? In a celebratory moment. Also, around this time of the year, and with this, I want to end this part of our segment and open soon to like an open conversation with Michal, who I know is your shlicha, but I want to say I knew her first, and whom I love and admire, and we have worked together in Jerusalem. And so we're just going to talk and reflect a little bit on what I brought here, and also hear her experience as an Israeli who wasn't born and raised in Jerusalem, but spent some time here. But what I want to say is another very important milestone in my relationship with Laf, and we're still friends to this day. Two things. When around this time of Yom Yerushalayim, of Independence Day, of the Nakba for the Palestinian people, around this time of the year, on the Jewish, these Jewish, Israeli, Palestinian, Arab. See, it's crazy to work in this field. It's very hard. It's like, it really is. You're always stepping on somebody's toes. But at this time in the Jewish calendar, where there's so many national holidays, events of grief and happiness, I noticed that for a month, I didn't see Rahaf in the office. I would have never understood that a time of celebration, for me, of my independence, would be a time that people, that a whole other community find, in whatever way they do it, find ways just not to be part of a physical space that's very fundamental to their growth for their own reasons. So the last story that I'll say is that, just to give a little bit of hope, is that another thing that happens on Hebrew University is that our department is in the Dean of Students office. And anyone who wants to rally, to protest, has to get approved, get a permit from the Dean of Students, and the Dean of Students has to be there. And which means that outside of Rahaf's and mine office, now I already have an office on my own, but outside of our department, there are protests. So anytime something like now, what's happening in Israel with the civil discourse and everything around the judicial reform rebuttal, depends how you want to call it. So all around that, it means that when there is a protest on campus, it's right outside my office. But not only that, because we are the Jewish people, you're always going to have a protest, and a protest that's protesting the protest. So, for instance, we had this is one of the hardest professional experiences I had as somebody who facilitates a multicultural program, and now programs of hundreds of students. There was an arrest on campus by police officers who come and do their masters on campus, whom themselves usually come from oppressed backgrounds. And these police officers heard two Palestinian teenagers who come to study Hebrew at a different empowerment program on our campus sing in Arabic, and arrested them because they felt that it was threatening. And this sparked huge tensions on campus. This was also at the midst of one of our, of course, misery loves company. So it was at a very heated time of terror wave in Israel. This was last year. And my Jewish students felt that we are all making a huge deal to be inclusive, sensitive about this arrest that put the Palestinian students in an uproar. So a lot of my Jewish students felt that we're not giving their narrative respect as civilians, identities that are experiencing a threat and violence. And our Palestinian students felt that they were unsafe now in the public domain on campus, that they can't speak their language, that God forbid somebody will think that they're saying something provocative and it can end in an arrest. And this was very, very complicated. There was a protest by Palestinians against the arrest, or against, in an uproar about it, criticizing the event. And there was a protest of right-wing activist students who were also expressing their civil activism against that protest. Right outside of our office, and in between them, the dean of students, and Rahaf and I, my Palestinian friend, went out to see what's happening. We saw we were in between these two protests, and we couldn't figure out what side we're going to go to. And we didn't really identify with either side. That's the truth. And we just found ourselves standing in the middle with our hands, hugging each other, laughing, at the situation, which is a form of therapy. People were looking at us. Who are these two? Who is this blonde person, with this traditional Palestinian woman? Why are they hugging? Why are they in the middle? Why are they laughing? What's going on here? And we were just kind of having our normal conversations. Like, do you ever think that these two protest sides are going to get along? Are they ever going to? And then we just both kind of thought, we don't think that they're ever going to find a common ground, but maybe our job is to find, the middle. And then we had a cup of coffee. So just kind of sharing with you how my Jerusalem is still evolving. And this is, I think, a common theme that I always speak about when I come to Central Synagogue. And I always, from the very first sermon you let me do on Yom Ha'atzmaut many years ago, I always said this, that our story, it's always evolving. All of these narratives, though, in a week are going to be at a very high intensity. Jerusalem Day is historically the day that marks what, again, some will call the occupation and some will call the unification of Jerusalem, specifically gaining the Jewish autonomy, Israeli autonomy back in areas like the Old City. And so this day, not a lot of people know this, but when like a year after, this is after the 6-Day War, of course, after we gained that territory, although now if you would come next week to Jerusalem on Jerusalem Day, you would just see a huge celebration, and soon I'll explain about that. It was very controversial at the time. It wasn't really intentional. Don't take it from me. Take it from the historian, Dr. Ilan Ezrachi, who writes about it, and other historians. We didn't go into the 6-Day War with an intention to gain these territories. We did. And the reality today looks like something that wasn't planned. And that's the harsh truth. And I can tell you that as a local here, not even as a clergy person. And so a year after we had those territories, spontaneously, the chief rabbinate said, let's do a prayer at the Western Wall. Teddy Kollek, then the mayor, didn't want to touch this hot potato. He didn't want to upset the residents, the Palestinian residents. He wanted to keep the quiet. They didn't know yet what to do with all these territories yet and where it's going. And yet, I will say to the credit of the chief rabbinate that they understood a need of the wider Israeli population, because spontaneously tens of thousands of Israelis came to pray at the Western Wall to mark the return of the Jewish people to the Old City, to the sacred sites. And that is what laid the foundation to what became, by law, an Israeli holiday, Yom Yerushalayim, which is now still very much in the atmosphere of that right-wing sector and the traditional chief rabbinate. But again, to their credit, that did something that answered a spiritual need. And so my questions are, with all the story of my Jerusalem, is I want to celebrate Jerusalem in its wholeness and in its spiritual, its symbolic meaning, and also as an individual that has a connection to the land and a nostalgic connection, and also as somebody who's learning all the time about other Jerusalems. And the big question is how? Because in a week, Rahaf and I probably won't talk for the week. And so this is just the reality here. I'm just being honest. This is the reality here in Jerusalem. And these are the questions: how to maintain relationships, how to celebrate your identity with integrity, how to be in new relationships, real relationships, not just to make you feel good and then you go back to your own lives. And so this was a little bit of my Jerusalem that I'm sharing with you. And so Michal, I'm happy to hear maybe if you have any of your thoughts and your experiences and what, where it resonates with you, what sounded interesting to you. You are on questions. We're giving you first dibs on questions before all the other Q&As.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Shani. And really, as you said, I've known you for many years now, but I've never really got a chance to hear your story as in depth. So again, thank you so much for sharing it. And while you were speaking, I think we have a natural intention. It happens to everyone that whenever we hear someone else's story, we always try to think of like the similarities and the differences within our story. And I feel like our stories are so different. They are so, so different. And somehow in our 30s, we both found ourselves in the Reform movement in Jerusalem, living in Jerusalem, loving Jerusalem. But I came from a very, very different background. I did not grow up in Jerusalem. I grew up in Tel Aviv. I can tell you the funny anecdote is amongst my siblings, I have 3 siblings. We always laugh at the fact that we never heard our parents fighting, except when we were driving to Jerusalem. Both of my parents hate Jerusalem. For the 5 years that I lived there. They would never come visit just because they hate driving to Jerusalem. Like they hate the hills, they hate the streets, they don't understand it. And that's sort of the environment. Like that's the Jerusalem I grew up with. I grew up with a Jerusalem that isn't mine. It's there. It's complicated. It's annoying to drive in. There's too much traffic, too much tension. There's no need. I mean, I think maybe growing up, I went to Jerusalem 3 or 4 times. Probably like for a bar mitzvah 1 year and maybe for a school trip 1 year. But it was really sort of not in my sphere growing up at all. I also didn't grow up in the Reform movement. I grew up in a very secular world. So Jerusalem didn't really have any meaning at all, other than it's a place that people are fighting over for some reason. And I'm not sure why they're fighting over it because it's not relevant to me. And I don't even think I knew about Jerusalem Day until much later in life, or until it like sort of came up in the news as this contentious day. And it sort of took me a very, very long time to figure it. Yeah.
That's exactly, thank you for sharing that, because now you're proving my point that when I said at the beginning, if you don't know what Jerusalem Day is, you're in good company, because even Israelis, because of what I explained, because it always has, from Teddy Kollek, a year after the 6-Day War, always has made certain sectors in Israeli society very proud and empowered. And I want to give that kavod, okay? And certain sectors have been, in the good case scenario, felt not connected, and in the bad case scenario, made them extremely uncomfortable and resentful. And so not everybody, not every Israeli, not every Jerusalemite, in my congregation, Reform congregation in Kirat Kor Neshama, with our values, we didn't have a prayer for Jerusalem. This is a new phenomenon I'll tell about at the end of the Q&A, that there are now alternative initiatives that even the municipality supports, which is pretty amazing. Things in Jerusalem, it's not what it looks like from far away.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was my big shock moving to Jerusalem. And I think also listening to your story, I'll give you a bit of background of my story. I moved to Jerusalem after I did my first shlichut. So I was a shlicha in Hartford, Connecticut for 2 years. And I sort of came back from living in a Jewish community in the States being like, oh my God, there's Jewish pluralism and it's amazing. Why don't we have it in Israel? So my initial intention when I came back to Israel was to go to Jerusalem, because in my mind, growing up as a Tel Aviv person, Jerusalem is the religious place. Jerusalem is where, we talk about Judaism. So I might as well go there and create religious and Jewish pluralism. And that's how I also found the Reform movement. And I started working at Kora Neshama, which by the way, was from a Facebook ad. Like I was looking to work in education. And I just saw an ad that Kora Neshama was looking for their youth director, and it worked out. I met with Dani Savich, and that's how I joined the Reform movement. It was really never in sort of a spiritual way. It was more of a practical way of profession. But to me, coming to Jerusalem, it was amazing. Like I grew up in Tel Aviv. A lot of my friends, laughed at me for moving to Jerusalem. It's like, why are you going? so complicated. It's so intense. It's so, oh, you just feel all the hatred. You feel all of everything. And for me, like it was really going up to Jerusalem. And suddenly I felt the spirituality. I felt the diversity of the Israeli people. I felt, to this day, when I walk, I lived in a neighborhood called Nechlaot, which is next to the Shuk, so moving around in Jerusalem, I love just walking and seeing the buildings and how beautiful they were and how different people were in the street, from growing up in Tel Aviv, it's not even a segregated because it's just one type of people. And suddenly there is an abundance of people that are so different and so beautiful. So it was very interesting to me. And I would love to hear more from you of growing up. You said you kind of grew up in this bubble of a very certain type of Jerusalem, which was very different from my experience. So I would love to hear more about that bubble of yours and sort of how you suddenly came out of that bubble.
Yeah, so my parents made Aliyah from Baltimore, and it was obvious to them that they're going to join a synagogue to raise their children. Now, this is not a mentality of an Israeli, because little did they know, like they didn't get experience, the school system, just national holidays, everything. They still had a mentality of, and I think, Baruch Hashem, thank God, because communities and synagogues and developing your Jewish identity within a community in a sacred space like that is something that should not exist in Israel and should not die from the world, But it was very clear to them as olim, as young immigrants, that they're going to raise their family in synagogue. That's how they grew up. So they went shul shopping, and they found our congregation. They were just beginning the gan, the kindergarten at that stage. They put me in the kindergarten. From there, the rest is history. Basically, me going to this kindergarten determined, I said 5 siblings, I'm second, determined the rest of our, Jewish lives in Israel. And so basically, I grew up in a strong community, and not only in the community, but in all of the institutions and in all of the educational institutions that, formal and not formal, that the Reform movement had to offer. And this already wasn't my parents. That already was me. Your parents can take you to synagogue, and your parents can put you in kindergarten, your parents can say that things are important, but not all of my siblings, were so crazy about shul. Like, I really, from a very young age, I was a very spiritual child. I spoke to God from age 5, still do. I love my Rabbi Levi. I had the best seats in the house to our synagogue. I would come, sit on the bima, take in all the voices, and I didn't want to do anything else with my life or with my time. And still, my best friends still today are my friends from shul. That being said, our synagogue was very meaningful in its first chapter of existence. Now the rabbi who created the synagogue is already Rabbi Emeritus. He's already retired, and we're now in a new stage of growth. And something that made this Reform synagogue succeed in Israel and in Jerusalem, from all places, was that its core community were people that immigrated from Anglo-Saxon countries. And they needed community, like that was their extended family. They don't have who to do their Pesach with. They don't have who to, and also for my parents, my grandparents, my mother's side made Aliyah. They retired early and made Aliyah, and I grew up with them also in Jerusalem till they passed away. But basically, they filled a function that really is what the traditional synagogue fills, all walks of life. It became complicated. And so to me, again, that even makes it a stronger explanation to why also my social group, the adults in my life, we were all speaking the same language, which was very, again, good for my anchor and my neshama and everything like that. I had to figure out on my own how to take this whole world and life and explain it to people around me that don't understand it, again, in the good case scenario, and are against it in the bad case scenario. I had to understand that early on my own and teach myself how to do that. I think you can hear from the way that I speak that I'm still learning how to do that. Not long ago, Rabbi Angela Buchdahl visited my work, to bring your rabbi to office day. She came and she saw my programs and my students and the Palestinians, the Israelis, and it was exciting. And then I brought her into one of the dialogue groups. We have a few. It's an amazing group of people, but it's the most complicated program we have because their main platform is through words. And words are the most difficult way to communicate when you're in conflict. Our better groups are the ones that communicate through music, through, I take them out sailing, through all kinds of other, like our women's group through being the womanhood, But I brought her to this group and she was shocked to see that only because she was there and introduced herself as rabbi and cantor, they asked her, how does she know me? And only then did I say that I'm a rabbi and cantor. And this was shocking, right? To everyone in the room. To Rabbi Angela.
What did you tell them that you're a rabbi and cantor?
So she looked at when they said, how do you know each other? And then she's like, then I think she understood, oh, there's a whole part, of Shani that maybe they don't know. Like she was my intern. She's been amazing. She's also a rabbi cantor. Amazing. It's not my words, but very, very powerful.
I think we can say you're an amazing
right.
rabbi.
So and then they started. Imagine you have Rabbi Angela Buchdahl in front of you for half an hour. There's so many things you want to ask that woman, right? Every time I have her for 10 minutes, there's so much I want to know. She's like one of my most important mentors. All of my students did not care about her in that moment. And the whole conversation turned to be about me, about this unicorn, this person that we thought we knew. And there's the whole part of identity, and they were blown away. They were, shocked, but also I got positive feedback. And I think part of my hesitance in bringing that part of my identity to my work is really my commitment to being a facilitator of inclusive spaces. I have Haredi students. I have women from East Jerusalem, and that is a more traditional part. Okay, you have to also understand, also just the Arab Palestinian students are multicultural within themselves. The students that come from up north, who are citizens, and also tend to be more secular, are very different than my students that come from East Jerusalem, a second from campus, but are more traditional as a community, and also don't have a status. They're not civilians. They have a different status, a temporary status that they always have. They don't participate in our elections. They participate in the local elections for the municipality, but not in the elections. And this can also explain why they're not protesting now. There's a big question. Why aren't they protesting? I understand it. They teach me a lot, but I'm so committed to them being able to knock on my door and receive, a safe space, that I put those titles aside, not because I thought people would disagree with me, because trust me, I'm a Reformed Jew in Israel. I've dealt with disagreements, even in my own household, but because because just to explain it, just to explain what it is, I don't need to explain in Central Synagogue what a Reformed cantor rabbi is, what Reformed Judaism is. And to many, it's just the ignorance that it exists. It's a minority. There's not a lot of knowledge about it. And then the whole conversation becomes about what? About me. And I'm there to be a facilitator. Yes, as much as I love my voice and I love my sermons and I love what I'm doing now, I'm not in the front lines. I mean, don't worry, everybody. I have my freelance going, and I'm a roaming cantor. I teach. I am the head of a cantorial program, and Israelis hear me a lot. But outside of Hebrew University, there my job is to empower the students to create the social change that I know they can, to lead their best lives and to experience the social mobility that Hebrew University is one of the only places that's not segregated in Jerusalem, and not to talk about in Israel. And so I really it's like a very rare, temporary opportunity. But that's something I grapple with. I had many emails back and forth with Rabbi Angela I feel comfortable to share. And nowadays I share more. I understand that there's a way to bring that part of my identity with integrity, and not to take away, not to take all of the thunder, not to take all of the conversation about my vocation, when it really should be about these things that were created. And so, sorry, just to say again, Yerushalayim Sheli, these parallel experiences, it's a real challenge for us, because then we spend half of our time just explaining each other to each other without even talking about who we are on the deeper level, or what we could be doing together, or just enjoying each other's company,
So I think, and this throws me back to a few things. First of all, I do want to reference, we did the series, which was Prospects on Peace, that we did with different grassroots organizations who work across borders. And really sort of, it also references a lot of the things that you talked about, where sometimes we don't think about it, even as Israelis, but there's different types of Palestinians. I mean, there's a difference between being a Palestinian who's a resident of the state of Israel versus a citizen of the state of Israel versus in East Jerusalem. Like Jerusalem in itself is a very, very unique place when we're talking about Jewish Palestinian. And then we also have to remember that both on the Jewish side and on the Palestinian side, it is very, very, very diverse. I mean, when we were talking about segregation in neighborhoods in Jerusalem, even just West Jerusalem is very segregated within its Jewish communities.
By the way, this is what I'm learning. It's going to be, learning is it's a process of a lifetime, and it's never too late. But what I'm learning is not all the progress is going to happen in shared spaces, because even just Jews are very diverse. And in Israel specifically, my parents that grew up in the same conservative synagogue, they practiced Judaism in a similar way, went to the same youth group. It's a beautiful story. But the truth is that for Jewish Israelis, that's you and I, when we came to work together, look, even here we have an example of coming from different backgrounds. And so it's a whole, just to bring together the different groups that have a common ground is a fundamental step before you connect. If you connect, and some of that is the Palestinian narrative. Again, I think in this, you and I, like your lunch and learn, I would probably learn from that many things. There's a lot of Israelis.
So many things that I didn't know.
Israelis don't know. My students, they teach me that this is just like, Zionism. It's a narrative that transcends even only Muslims, Muslim, more and more Christians. My Druze students identify as the young generation as Palestinian today, that's for a whole nother lunch and learn. If you want, I can set you up with that. But it's an identity. And in West Jerusalem, we're not aware of it at all. Again, remember that 5-year-old girl that just didn't see it in front of her eyes until today is trying to pick together. What's East Jerusalem? It's huge. It's huge. Just like what's West Jerusalem? And so really understanding that it's a narrative is part of understanding it's not a threat, because we have that in common. We have we have also an identity that held us together as a people and transcended different denominations. Remember, the Reform Judaism used to not be Zionist. Now it is. Different communities with different approaches. We have to be able to touch that narrative. I mean, I really strongly believe that it is very harmful to us as Jewish Israelis, Jerusalemites from West Jerusalem, Jerusalemites in general, Israelis in general, to not acknowledge this as an identity, not a threat. Are there aspects for many, many reasons that have posed a threat? Yes. Yes, to our lives, mutually so. But we have to acknowledge it as a narrative, not a form of protest, not a reactional thing. It's not anymore what it is to the young people that I meet. And for them to have a place, and this is what they told Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, it's the only place in West Jerusalem where I can say I'm a Palestinian and not be scared. And so this is what we're dealing with, I love Jerusalem. I'm probably never going to leave Jerusalem. I don't want people to be scared to say who they are. I really believe that so long as people are scared to say who they are, my son, who's 3.5 years old, is in great danger. He's in danger. This is what violence, stems from. So, yeah, I don't even know where the question started, but that was just, threw me off.
It's very, very powerful. And we're almost out of time. We didn't even get. So
yeah, I know, right?
If our audience, if you do have any questions that you would like to write in the chat, so I can voice them or let you speak, please feel free. Now is the time. I do want to give just another anecdote because you were just speaking about it, and I do think it's because you said before about the question of the Reform identity and being a Reform minority as sort of a way of I don't want to say silencing, but sort of putting yourself away in order to facilitate this conversation. And I do want to share with you, I was in a program last year by the Mendel Leadership Institute for youth leadership. So we were 25 fellows all doing, in lead positions in different youth movements. And we were really representative of all Israeli society, from the ultra-Orthodox to the Reform to the Arab, the Palestinian, the Druze, the Bedouins. Like, we really were all in this program. And I was the Reform Jew, or the liberal Judaism participant of this program.
And fascinating, considering where you came from. I mean, this is just amazing.
Yes. But my interesting thing was that I felt most connected in this program to the ultra-Orthodox man and to the Arab Palestinian.
Exactly.
Really that feeling of a minority, but also out of my identity and out of my Reform identity, I was able to really have a conversation with them that gives them space in the narrative that they think that I hold as a white Jewish Israeli, in a way that from my Reform identity, I can hold and accept and have that conversation. So sometimes I feel that my title as a Reform Jew actually allows a lot of facilitating for these situations. So I just wanted to share that. And in the meantime, we got a question from Phyllis, who wants to know.
Phyllis, hi!
Yes. Phyllis, do you want to ask the question? You can unmute yourself and ask the question.
So good to see you. I still have your scarf that you gave me. It's beautiful.
Well, Phyllis, you are on mute, so we can't hear you.
Okay. What's it like to be a working mom in Jerusalem?
Oh boy.
Childcare like?
Okay.
Well, how old is your son now?
3.5.
Wow.
3.5.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, that's a great question, because I mean, really, I'm speaking about myself. I'm speaking about young, inspiring women from all walks of life, denominate. Here you have Michal and I, Rahaf, Palestinians, Jews. I mean, it's a good question, because, we could talk about our beliefs and our ideology, but at the end, our challenges are sometimes, like I said, real life challenges, and motherhood is something that is quite a challenge, and also a great privilege in the vocation of being a spiritual leader in the Middle East, in Jerusalem. What's childcare like? The foundation of our country, which is at the midst of which has been changing for a while, and also at the midst of a more dramatic change, and we'll see where it goes, was very socialism.
There's a lot of social welfare in Israel.
Right, exactly. Social welfare. Thank you. Okay, like healthcare, right, is a big one. I know that from spending time in the States. Our healthcare is an amazing system in that way, and it stems from the early pioneers and the way that they viewed, a country and what it should provide. And so you can see that in our daycare. My son is 3 years old. His daycare is basically for free, and it's public daycare. But still, I mean, I think the challenge, and also in terms of our maternity leave by law, now we have also paternity leave by law. I know the Central Synagogue, so their clergy give it to women and men equally when they're not obliged. They don't have to do that by law. We have the conditions, but I'll tell you, for my women's group, meaning young women from all, in a multicultural setting, I think women all around the world still share this challenge that we've made big strides, and yet we're still working on the nuance of relationships, society, gender roles on the interpersonal level that I think still hold us back, also as mothers, feeling just comfortable to be mothers. I remember one of the first Zooms I did in Central Synagogue while there was COVID, and some lockdown. Matan was crying hysterically in the other room. And, it's such a moment as a mother. You just want to say, okay, this is my life, but it takes a while to non-apologetically, with integrity, say, my family can be part of this. This is also part of my leadership. It takes courage, and it feels still like it takes courage. That's amazing to me. And so that's I think, a universal experience of women in the Western world, okay? Because there's also women in much different places. And I can probably relate. Like, I remember talking to colleagues on the Bima, Central Synagogue, and we were relating to these challenges, and they understood what that means. And I still sit at the first train station in Jerusalem in the summer. It's so hot in July, leading services to hundreds of Israelis with my ensemble, and recently with my son sitting on my lap the whole time. It's just like,
Good
so
for you.
I don't have a right answer, Phyllis. You know, grandparents. That's one of the right. God bless them.
I was just having this conversation with friends here, and they were asking us what Israeli kids during the summer, and like grandparents. That's what
Exactly.
Summer. Unfortunately, we
have to finish.
We have to finish. There was a whole question about high schools and integrated schools, which is a whole other hour.
A whole other thing. Oh my God! Look, we have enough we have information for many lunch and learns. Michal knows I'm going to be in New York in the winter, so we can continue to. But also now that when we say goodbye, I also just want to say, even this week we don't have to say goodbye.
That's
because
true.
On Wednesday I'm going to lead a program that has become a tradition of Central Synagogue, of another forum that I'm very involved in, called Rashut Rabim, 40 organizations of Jewish renewal functioning in Jerusalem alone. That should give you hope, supported by the municipality. Oh my God, how could this be? And Kehilat Zion, which is a congregation, non-affiliated, that brings together Mizrahi and Ashkenazi prayer and rituals, and also has an interfaith group that, and now I'm going to show you, and I invite you to join this program, that leads the largest and only multi-faith prayer service on Jerusalem Day. This is their event. Because we've partnered with Central Synagogue, you are welcome to sign up through the link that we just put in chat. Anyone, also the people on Facebook. I will lead a half an hour prep behind the scenes session that you will get a link to Zoom, and I will interview the rabbi of the congregation. We'll continue to talk about the experience of Jerusalem, hope and worry, and celebration. And how do you do Jerusalem? How do you do Yom Yerushalayim in an interfaith way? And then you can join hundreds of Israelis. And because we partner with Central Synagogue and Rashut Rabim, the whole event is going to be translated. You're going to get source sheets in English. For myself, I'm even going to teach you a song in the prep event. And so we don't really have to say goodbye. We can say lehitraot, like you say in Israel, until we see you later, hopefully on Wednesday, same time actually, 12:30 p.m., different kind of lunch and learn, but also to get a sneak peek and a little taste of Jerusalem at this time, mamash. Like I'll send you into one of my favorite rituals. And so there is hope, there is tikva. Michal, thank you for doing this amazing work. Thank you, Central Synagogue, for having me back, for supporting me along the way in all the twists and turns. And I really, really hope, and I'll put the poster up for just the end, that I see you, that I'll see you, if not again this week, and another time.
Thank you so much, Shani. Thank you so much, everyone who is here, who joined us, and everyone who joined us on Facebook. And thank you very, very much to the AV team and the adult engagement at Central, who has helped us put this all together. This was so wonderful and just so fun. And any excuse for me to just hang out with Shani again is great. So we're hoping that you'll come for many more. And we hope to see you all on Wednesday for the program. Thank you all very, very much, and have a great rest of your day and rest of your week.